had a big event in our family this past weekend because it was more or less our Christmas, because our families came together, and their oldest sister was married this past weekend. And that even brought the whole family together. We have five children, and most of them live in our area of Texas, but one lives a ways off up in Fort Worth and practices medicine. He came down. But there was another one that came from a further distance, and that was our son by the name of Rand. He came in from Kentucky. And you may have heard his name. I think he's in the Senate or something. He's involved in politics of some sort. But it is a real delight to be here. My wife does some traveling. She didn't come on this trip, but she sent me a little cookbook. And take a look at that. You can find out a little bit more about our families. When she came up with this idea many years ago, I used to kid her. I said, "No, who was a silly old cookbook about our recipes?" And I don't vouch for all of them. That is on their nutrition, but on taste, I vouch for them. But it was a way. Her idea was in the district to introduce. I used to kid her and say, "No, they only want to hear about the Federal Reserve System, and they want to hear about the United Nations, everything." She said, "No, they might want to hear about the family too." So that's how that got started. So we decided to mail it out in a couple very important states, and I think Iowa qualifies for that as I go on. I think there's an election coming up here pretty soon, and a major event will be decided. And in many ways, you live in a special state. We're involved in a special election. And proportionately speaking, your vote has been magnified manyfold compared to others. I mean, it's the first straw vote, first caucus meeting, and it's national. Everybody watches it. It's a small state, but there's a big stakes on it. And there's a lot of importance on this, because if you'd happen to be in California, who has a later primary, hardly anybody talks about that, and it would be very difficult for candidates like myself to get a foothold in a state like California if you didn't have these many, many millions of dollars. But in a state like this, it makes a difference. So the value of your vote is really boosted, and you play an important role. So if you show up, at the caucus and vote, just remember that you are participating in a major event. Because I think last heard, somebody told me that we're doing pretty well in the polls. That's what I heard we're doing. So we expect to do pretty well on January 3rd. So appreciate any help you can give us. But I've been talking not so much about elections over the years. Some people describe me as not very good and not much of a politician, because I always want to talk about the issues. And that's probably generally true, because when I first got involved in politics, it was not to win an office. It was to get involved by talking about some very important issues. Even back in the 1970s, the handwriting was on the wall about what would happen to our society once we decided that there'd be no limits on spending. And that's when it occurred. It occurred in 1971. There was no restraints on the printing press. It was totally unlimited on how much money the Federal Reserve could print. Now, why is that important? That means there's no limits on the spending. If we had to collect the money from the people to run our endless wars and run the endless welfare state, the taxes would be so high it would wreck the economy, and people would be angry and we'd have to quit. So there had to be a way to pay for things where the people don't quite recognize it or delay the payment. So we had to stop the taxes, stop increasing them anyway. There's some people over in Washington who would still like to increase the taxes. But then the borrowing started. There's always a limit on borrowing, because if you borrow too much, interest rates go up. And they claim, that would be a bad sign. But actually, it's a warning sign that the government's spending too much. So they don't want that message saying, hey, you have to back off, interest rates going up. So then they have invented this notion that we just have somebody in a secret room someplace get together, and they call themselves the Federal Reserve, and print whatever money we need. And that works for a while. But eventually, it ruins the money and it ruins the economy. It causes too much debt, and the government size grows. It undermines our liberties. We get involved too much overseas. The welfare state grows where it's unsustainable. And even the programs that were designed to help people, they're under attack too because of the crisis. The economy gets weaker, tax revenues go down. There's a limit to how much you can inflate because people eventually reject the dollar. And what happens when you print too many dollars and they reject the dollars, prices go up. Our government's telling us there's no inflation, but there really is. If you're on a fixed income, you notice there's inflation because and your standard of living goes down. There's no way the government can keep up increasing the benefits with Social Security, so they allow the standard of living to go down and pretend every once in a while to increase the benefits. So that is we're now at a point where we have to make a decision what we want to do. If we continue to do this, everything is going to get worse. The money will become, get to the point when maybe it'll get even worthless, but we will have inflation and the debt will be unsustainable. We now are the greatest debt in the world, in the history of the world. We owe over $3 trillion overseas to foreigners, plus we have a national debt of $15 trillion. We have obligation for the entitlement system of probably $60 trillion. At the same time, we're not getting any new jobs. In the last decade, since the year 2000, we've had an increase in population of 30 million people and essentially no new jobs. And then they wonder why we're in a problem with that. That's the problem. So something has happened to chase our jobs away. And it's a combination of the economic environment here, plus the monetary system. We overtax and we overregulate, but we also chase capital away when we have the privilege of printing the world money. It's easier to send our money out rather than work for what we need. And if you can send the money out, then the jobs go with it, and the jobs go overseas. And for a while, it seems to be a benefit because we can buy cheap products, the products come in, and we don't seem to be getting poorer. And on the surface, up until a few years ago, we didn't seem to be that much poorer. But where we fooled ourselves was there was too much debt. Most of it was based on debt, whether it's national debt or personal debt or student debt. And we have all this, but it's unsustainable. We can't pay for it. So this is the reason I address this from a free market viewpoint, personal viewpoint, from the viewpoint of the Constitution. And that means we need a lot of changes. And I would start off within the first year, I would say this is so serious, it's overspending that is a real problem, that what we have to do in the first year is cut $1 trillion of spending out of our budget.